but it's not always up to the archives to work as promoters.
Right.
They may. Make sure you put some. Make sure you're wearing that wolfsbane. Greetings across whatever you listen to podcasts on. This is the Silent Film Music Podcast with Ben Modell. It's the podcast that takes you inside the mind of someone as they prepare for, perform, and reflect upon performances of live musical accompaniments to silent films. I'm your host, Ben Modell, and this is our 53rd episode. Lucky 53. Yeah, we're recording at the very beginning of November, although if you were outside, you would not believe that. I'm here, as always, joined virtually by co-host and co-producer Kerr Lockhart. How are you doing, Kerr?
Hi, Ben. Sipping a margarita out here on the beach.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, I'm on a lanai right now myself. If I may use that word on television. I'm very pleased with the last two episodes. I think that a lot of people will get a lot out of the Bill Perry interviews, and even if people haven't found it yet, it's there as a resource for anybody who's interested in William Perry and his music. And I think
boy, the response has been great too.
Yeah, and I think that you and I have researched that at some point, Google or Bing or whatever searches are going to start turning up results on podcasts, and so it's just something that I thought was an important resource for fans and scholars, and also I wanted to honor his work. I think his place and his music's place and the renaissance that silent film had in the last century can't be overemphasized enough.
I, at one time, compared one of the scores to a Max Steiner score, and I really felt like that. I think it was a Zorro score, that he's got these very well-shaped, fully developed themes that manage to play out and yet support the film.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And he's really using the piano like it's an orchestra. I think people don't realize how important not only the series that Paul Killiam did, but the fact that the scores took the film seriously for the first time. And what was interesting, like what Bill said about Paul Killiam, there was this moment where he went from making fun of these movies to putting them up on a pedestal for the rest of us. I certainly hope anyone listening, if you haven't bought any or all of William Perry's music CDs, do go to his website, so you're going to get it from him, and he gets more royalties that way. Or feel free to go to Naxos or Amazon. But if you've heard those scores and would love to hear them again, definitely buy as many of his CDs as you can. It's just wonderful, and just to know his musical background was fascinating. And he had an Ozone Orchestra in the 50s. Mm-hmm. Amazing, yeah. So I'm really glad we were able to do that and share that with everybody.
Now, as far as your own playing, either at the time you were starting out back at NYU or now talking to him in the interview, how do you think it's touched you and what you do?
Well, at the beginning, I just had that sound in the back of my head, trying to make music that took the film seriously, and which was something that was also reinforced by what I learned from Lee Irwin. But I think that in speaking with Bill and recording the podcast and then listening to the edits before we posted them, and then maybe listening to them again, it really made me feel like I need to take my own playing up a notch again. Every once in a while, I'll have some kind of encounter like that makes me think, you should really try a little harder, Ben. And actually, the score I just recorded for Sky High, the 1922 Tom Mix film, which I'll be releasing on Blu-ray at sometime in 2023. I chose to do it on piano. And I was thinking of those Silent Year scores, and I think my playing is a little bit, just a hair better than usual. And I did really make a point, and this is something I think about a lot, is how often do you play a character's theme or the main theme for the film? Because if you play it too often, then it becomes recognizable music and it pulls you out of the experience. And I tend to err on the other side where I will use a main theme 3 times, maybe 4, like the love theme, because there are 3 moments when it fits. I remember speaking with somebody during a Q&A, and they asked me, do you use leitmotifs or themes? And I said, I sure did. I just used it. But I think that it was more of a subliminal thing, which is fine with me. But I'm always looking to question what I'm doing and see if there is a different way or a better way of employing a certain technique. And so I created a main theme for the opening titles of Sky High, and I bring it around a few times. There are a few places at Reel Breaks and stuff like that where it can come around again. And the same thing with the theme I came up with for Tom Mix himself. And this is something that, as Bill talked about, was a big part of what he did, is that you had a theme. I think everybody listening who knows that Gold Rush score can kind of hum at least 3 of the themes from the Gold Rush, regardless of how many times we've seen it. So it's really made me think, you should try a little harder. And I hope it's paying. I hope it's paying off.
Ben, every week we do, or most weeks we try and plug subscriptions to your email, which is news of all things Ben Modell, appearances, new products, and in a recent case, an article that you actually were able to provide readers with something you'd written that would ordinarily be behind a paywall.
Yeah.
Because apparently your emails are stuffed with goodies.
Yeah,
People will take the trouble to really take a look.
Yeah, and it's always I'm constantly trying to find new ways to make the emails work better, are easier to read and easier to navigate. So I'll put images and then put links, because I watched somebody scroll up and down through one of my emails and tap, and sometimes it was just the image, and I thought I really need to put links there. And sometimes people can miss the links that I put in there. So the article that I wrote was for the American Guild of Organists magazine called The American Organist. And that came about because Jim Rhodes, who a bunch of decades ago founded the Kansas Silent Film Festival, who is also an organ enthusiast, recommended me to the editor of the magazine to write an article. He himself was going to write an article about someone who plays organ at horse races, which...
I hope the horses appreciate that.
Well, I hope so. I mean, I figure hockey. I know there's a bunch of people I know who play in hockey matches or ball games, like Dave Calendine out in Detroit. But I never thought of playing at a horse race. But I guess you could do that. Anyway, so Jim wrote.
You have to play that Strauss polka, Bonfrey, the horse race music.
Yeah, and while you're waiting for everybody to get lined up, you play Fugue for Tin Horns. I got the horse right here. It does have a sort of doom-ba-dip, boom-ba-dip kind of, while you're waiting kind of music.
I got the horse right here, the name is Paul Revere, and here's a guy that says if the weather's clear, can do. This guy says the horse can do. If he says the horse can do.
But anyway, so Jim Rhodes connected me with the gentleman who was the editor and asked me to write something. And I had written something on my blog in 2018 that I posted in October of that month called How to Accompany a Silent Movie at Halloween. Because every year, before COVID and now again, everyone who can play the organ gets a DVD of Nosferatu or Caligari, etc., and it gives it a shot. So I adapted that article and it was published in the American Organist, but they sent, because I don't subscribe, they sent me a PDF of the article itself. And so I made that available through a link in my emails. And I've now started, this is the new thing I'm trying with my emails, is that even though in the body of the email I'll say, I'm playing for this at this theater, information is here, and then the word here is a hyperlink. And by the time you get to the bottom, then you got to go back up and find it. If you're on your phone, it's going to be a bit of a hunt. And so I now have a block at the end of the email, but before all the pictures I add, that says, and here are the links. And there's just a list of everything I've mentioned.
So to follow that lead, how do you play for a Halloween show?
Very careful. I mean, this is a list of my basic don'ts and be carefuls about film accompaniment, but it was couched in the context of, so you want to play the organ for a silent movie because it's Halloween and everybody's doing it. Just a lot of the basics, taking the film seriously, don't do song title puns. There was somebody who once told me about an organist who was very proud of the fact that during the scene in Phantom of the Opera, when Eric the Phantom is in the catacombs and he goes down under the water, the organist was so proud that he played Under the Sea from The Little Mermaid and got a huge laugh.
Oh, dear God.
And I've heard of all sorts of things like that. But a lot of people think that that's what you're supposed to do, is make fun of the movie. And so I talk about things like that and avoiding sound effects, and I don't really remember. It's just a lot of the basic B-flat stuff.
Well, everyone can go find that. Go check in your copy of the email.
Yeah, if you get my emails, you'll see it. But and then the other reason I decided to start doing this with the block of links is somebody came to my show in Brookings, South Dakota, who gets my emails, saw that I was going to be playing there, even though the show was 4.5 hours away from where he lived in Minnesota. This guy, Tracy Toltzman, who is the head of the Blockheads tent of the Sons of the Desert, he and his wife, Mary, made a road trip of it, but he told me, he couldn't find the link, and so he Googled it up and found the information. I figured, I need to make sure it's easier for people to find this. I'm not faulting him, because clearly this is something I didn't format well. So a big part of marketing and promotion is understanding, having an empathic understanding of what people who read what you're putting out there are experiencing, and making it more easy and effective for them to buy things or whatever. And I guess I thought I was being so clever by making sure I had lots of links throughout the body, but it's easy to lose sight of them and to have them repeated, sort of like the end of every Universal Silent, where it says, a good cast is worth repeating. And so, the film is over, the audience is applauding, now we have to wait another 18 seconds while we look at the cast list again. That's something I had to, deal with when I play for any Universal Silent, but also when I play for Frankenstein, because it was at the end of Frankenstein as well.
Before we get to that, just to stick with the traditional silent film accompanist October, and if you're not playing in October, you're not a silent film accompanist.
You're usually pretty busy, and even if you aren't, that's just the one silent film you do every year, especially this year. I'm
going to give you the kind of question that you always hate to answer, and I'm waiting to see how you avoid it this time.
Okay.
So the choice is, so the programmer said to you, it's going to be either Caligari, Nosferatu, or Phantom of the Opera. Which one and why? Just for you, ignoring the audience and the programming, just for what Ben would like to play.
Oh, I really never think that way. And that is a question people. Oh, yeah. Along with, do you have a favorite film? There's always the question, do you have a favorite film to play for? And for me, it's always about the audience. What have you already shown them? Do they have any exposure to silent film? So if it's a brand new audience, Nosferatu or Phantom, if they've seen something, then Caligari, because that's a pretty weird movie.
Yeah,
it's a lot to take in. I love teaching that film and showing it to my students and talking about the crazy sets and makeup and everything, but that's not ideal for a first-timer audience. And when I played for the first time I played in Brookings, South Dakota last year, that's what they wanted to show, and it was the first time they were doing this, and they figured, we'll do it on Halloween. Everybody knows Phantom of the Opera. They know the story. They know about the chandelier and the mask and all that stuff, and so we'll run that. And this year, because it was the centennial of Nosferatu, like you need another reason to show that picture at Halloween. There were, a lot of shows of Nosferatu, but I did a show of Nosferatu at the Jacob Burns Film Center out in Pleasantville, and they have not shown much silent film over the last several years and are just starting to get back into it. So that show, we had a pretty full house, and I brought my digital theater organ out, and it was pretty scary stuff. It was a lot of fun. But that, it's really, for me, it's all about the audience, and so the flip side of that is at the Cinema Arts Center, where I've been playing there every month since 2006. We've built up an audience, as has the Cinema Arts Center, because they've been around for 45 years. They know, the people who come know that if we're showing something in the silent film series, or something has been programmed by Dylan or any of the other people, Dylan Skolnick, that it's going to be something worth watching. So I played for a film called The Bat, directed by Roland West, and most people know of The Bat Whispers, but this was the silent film that he made that was a remake of. And we had a pretty good turnout for that. We got the 35 millimeter print from UCLA Film and Television Archive. But again, that was the thing where I figured I don't have to show Nosferatu. They had already run Nosferatu earlier in the month with the Invincible Czars doing their score, so that's fine. That's a fun event. But so for an audience like, well, you've seen all this stuff already. Here's something that you really should know about, but it's just not part of the canon just yet.
I've seen you make some other recommendations for October. Was it the Cat and the Canary?
Yeah, Cat and the Canary is great, and it's just that it doesn't have a famous monster to sell it. The title of the film sounds like a Tweety cartoon.
Yeah, and that's that genre of the scary house genre.
Yeah, and it's a film that set the tone and production design for Universal Horror. They followed it, and The Cat and the Canary was followed up the following, I think, year with a film called The Last Warning, which is basically the same film with a lot of the same cast, but it's in a theater. And that's, I've gathered you here to read the will, and we'll find out who's going to inherit the money, and then bodies start disappearing. But the title isn't much of a draw. And The Bat absolutely is. It's also a bunch of people gathered in a spooky old house, and the production design is by William Cameron Menzies, so it's just amazing to look at. And there are elements of it or from The Bat Whispers that inspired Bob Kane in developing and creating the Batman character from the comic books. So you say the bat, and you put a couple of stills of the silhouette of a bat that looks like it's the bat signal. It's an easy sell, even if you haven't been to a silent film before.
Yeah, it would be nice to see some of the archives making some curated lists of what's available on 35 or on DCPs. That would be some alternates for the Halloween season. Yeah,
well, that'll be a blog post I can put up next year in March or April, so that programmers can start use that as a resource. It would be great for archives take care of the films. They make sure they get shipped out and inspected and preserved and all that kind of stuff. But it's not always up to the archives to work as promoters. Right. They may, but that is a good idea. And so I'll back time 5 or 6 months before Halloween next year, and I'll put up a blog post with a list of the usual suspects, and as a follow-up to my other blog post, just to let people know what's out there and where to get it. And the Bat, unfortunately, right now is only available in 35 millimeter, but there are plenty of art houses that can do 35, and perhaps at some point UCLA will make a scan of their preservation material, and it'll become more available.
Now you've been crossing boundaries, and you're accompanying films with synchronized sound, or at least one.
Yeah.
Well, we've become familiar with Philip Glass's score to Dracula, which was the first of the talkie wave of horror, and you've gone on to the second, which is Frankenstein.
Yeah, and I had done the score for Dracula, I think 3 different times just before COVID. Because that film has no musical underscore, and the filmmaking of Dracula, a lot of the techniques are not that strong. There are pauses you can drive a truck through, and a lot of the performances, not just Lugosi's, they're a little bit either creaky or everyone is still figuring out how to make a sound film and how much is dialogue and how much do you watch people go up a flight of stairs with nothing else happening. And you really ache for underscore in a film like Dracula. Because it went so well, I thought I'd try the same thing with Frankenstein, which has no musical underscore. It only has music at the very beginning and in the closing titles. Music which there's no screen credit for, and I have to imagine that those music cues are mood cues or photoplay cues. I just haven't figured out what they are just yet. But there's no musical underscore, and what's interesting about Frankenstein is that the first half of it doesn't need that much. And also James Whale's direction, and perhaps also whoever was cutting the picture, it's a lot stronger. The visual storytelling is a lot stronger. It moves ahead, but there are definitely places here and there where you just need a little hint of something here and there. And then in the second half, once it's maybe the last third of the film really needs more. But there are little things where, a scene ends and then we fade out in silence. We hold in black for a second, then we fade up again in silence, and we wait maybe 5 or 6 seconds before anybody says anything. And so you expect a musical transition the way you might have heard in a radio play, in old-time radio. So,
well, and also to remember the structure of those first-generation sound horror films, it's a half an hour before you're seeing anything really weird, scary, monstrous. It's all building atmosphere and suspense. Then you've got a half an hour of, all right, we admit there is a monster in this movie, and then it's only the last, and these films are rarely even 90 minutes, they're more like 80. So you have 20 minutes of actual violent mayhem.
Yeah, and Frankenstein, I think, is 71 minutes. So what I did is I watched the film a couple times and took a lot of detailed notes on where I thought musical underscore would go. I would hear it in my head or feel my instinct to lean into the keyboard and say, oh, this needs something. And then I would also make note of 2 or 3 things that happen just before that cue should start. So for a transition, I would put 2 lines of dialogue and then say, go from this mood to that mood. And then when you see the Frankenstein, not the creature is the creature, Frankenstein is the guy. When you see him take that second puff of the cigarette, drop out. So I could be ready for things. But there were a couple of things that happened during the show and during rehearsal that I was not expecting to happen. The film opens with a prologue. And if you watch the Blu-ray, it doesn't open with the Universal logo. It just starts cold. And this man walks it to center stage and starts talking to you. So when we started the show, I did big scary opening and transition into that. And then when this man begins speaking, I had initially planned to have something very low and like a line of cellos would be, or basses, very quietly underneath him. And then when we were doing a sort of a sound check just to watch the film on screen, and I had this other thing occur to me to use just the chrysoglot, which sounds like a celeste or like a vibraphone without the tremolo running. And that's what I wound up using in this show. And here's a little bit of that.
Frankenstein, a man of science who sought to create a man after his own image without reckoning upon God. It is one of the strangest tales ever told. It deals with the 2 great mysteries of creation, life and death. I think it will thrill you. It may shock you. It might even horrify you. So if any of you feel that you do not care to subject your nerves to such a strain, now is your chance to, we've warned you.
And I find it interesting that the harmonic idiom you use would be a bit modern in 1931.
It probably is, but that's what came out of my hands during rehearsal.
No, I think it makes it very effective.
I think it does. It's just going from to G minor to E flat minor, and then back and forth. And I do wonder about whether I would do the same thing the next time I play for it. But that's what I tried. I mean, I told the...
I think it sets up, this is a fairy tale, but a scary fairy tale.
But without hitting you over the head, it's just see, I told the audience, two things. One is I'm just trying to add seasoning here and there where it's needed. And I also told the audience, this might not work. We're about to find out.
I really think it sets up that I'm going to tell you a story.
Yeah, I felt it needed something like that. And there were a couple of other scenes where, like, there's one thing that I felt needed help, which is the first time we see the creature. He comes in, and there's that whole sequence with turn off the lights, and then we turn on the light, and we watch Karloff as the creature stand there, look up at the sun, and then he holds his hands up in the air, and he makes that gesture that he makes a few times in the film where his hands just, they look like they're trying to reach for something or beckon something or hold something.
Like it's a metaphoric reach, yeah.
I suppose. And it's hard to get inside his head, but I thought that moment needed a little something. So, and you'll hear in the recording, which was done with my iPhone sitting on the stage, so it's not excellent sound quality, but what you're going to hear is from the moment the creature enters, and I actually was not going to play at that point, but there was something that kicked in when he walked through the door, and I just did something very, very light, and the excerpt goes all the way through the whole sequence with him looking up at the light, and then they close the shade or whatever it is, and he sits down.
You see, it understands. Watch. Take care, Herr Frankenstein, take care. Shut off the light. Sit down. Go and sit down. It understands this time. It's wonderful. Frankenstein, Frankenstein, where is it? Where is it? Get away with that torch.
As always, I love these recordings where you can hear the audience. It adds so much. You have 3 layers going now. You've got the music, you've got the sounds of the film, and you've got the audience. And it's really rich. This is some of the most fun samples that I think I've heard since I've been working with you on the show.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, they're fun. I'm trying to give you a sense of what it was like to be at the show, but also some examples of what I was trying to do, so you don't think that I'm doing a wall-to-wall score. So there's one. Here's a clip of just a transition. It's a couple of lines of dialogue which I had written down. And the scene ends, and we fade out and fade into something else. It's just to take people musically and emotionally from one place to the next.
I made it with these hands, and with these hands I'll destroy him. I must find him. I'll go with you. No, you stay here and look after Elizabeth. I leave her in your care, whatever happens. You understand? In your care.
And then the other moment, of course, is when the creature comes in and scares the heck out of Mae Clarke, playing Elizabeth, the fiancée of just Frankenstein.
Shoved a grapefruit in his face.
Right. I was trying to think, why do I know that name? Oh, right. Public Enemy.
That would have taught that monster.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. Everybody is has their own performance style in this film, as was the case with Dracula. And she's actually one of the more as close to natural as you can get in 1931, as opposed to Colin Clive has his style. The guy who plays Elizabeth's father seems to be doing whatever the heck he wants. He'll walk into a shot and say, "Oh, what's this here? Are you trying to burn the place down? Give me a chair. Is that a chair?" Oh, and it's like said nobody could control it. Anyway, the moment when the creature enters the room, that for some reason Frankenstein has locked her in this room for no reason in a close-up. The audience laughed. There's nothing you can do about it. But we hold on a wide shot, and it's one of those things that would totally work in a silent film where we have this big wide shot of the bedroom. There's Elizabeth in the foreground, and in the window we see the creature comes in, climbs through the window, and slowly approaches her. We cut to a medium shot and then back, and then he follows her over to the door. Now, in a silent film, we'll buy the fact that she doesn't hear anything, but come on. But you have to do something because it is kind of clunky, and you don't want to be over the top. Look out, here comes the monster. Just a low simmering suspense. So you'll get to hear some of what I did for that sequence all the way through the end of it. And that shows you a little example of my making notes about where the dialogue starts, where to come down, and my notes might have said cut out at this word, but I may have, during the show, felt a different energy and a different flow and kept going just lightly underneath to segue out of the music. So, like I said, there were things that I planned. There were things that, until I was in the theater with a huge image in front of me and a absolutely packed house behind me. We're all on the ride with the film. There's no way to rehearse that. So that's one of the advantages to improvising, is that if you leave yourself open to your instincts and inspirations, something you may not have planned, but suddenly in the moment will feel, oh, this needs something. I'm just going to just turn on the 8-foot strings, but close the swell shades all the way, and just very carefully trickle something in here. You can do that. And so there were some places where I think it worked. And then the big climax of the film, which is just a series of big overhead wide shots of people with torches going through the countryside, definitely needs something. And so I will at some point write something more specific, but it's something I'm just considering what I call March of the Angry Villagers. And then that builds into the big sequence where they've trapped the creature at the windmill. And it may not be easy to hear in this recording sample, but it starts in the last maybe minute or so of the fire. And I have a note to myself. There are 3 or 4 times where we cut to the creature up at the top of the windmill, and he's waving the flames away. But the last one of those shots, there's a lot more flames, and the creature is just screaming in terror and panic. And I felt that having the music completely drop out at that moment and then resume after we cut away was the most effective, and which is the same way I treated the sequence when the creature is raised up during the lightning storm and then brought back down. There's all these sound effects, whereas the transformation sequence in Metropolis needs a lot of music. I felt that it was more scary to just have the film's own sound. So what we'll hear now is the tail end of the sequence with the fire of the windmill. You may hear the moment where I drop out and you hear the monster screaming, the creature screaming. The music resumes and then it dies down and segues into the next sequence.
Well, this I think this opens a door to quite a lot of different exploration, going again past Halloween. I'm thinking off the top of my head of classic sound films pre-King Kong that have got space open. You know, All Quiet on the Western Front jumped out of my head.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the thing is that at RKO, there's a point in the early 30s when David O. Selznick becomes the general manager or some position like that, and he feels it's important to have music and hires Max Steiner. And that's why there's music in a lot of the RKO films, and that's why there's a score for King Kong. And a lot of other studios were not doing that. And one thing I remember watching on Turner Classic Movies is Mad Love, Peter Lorre's first American film. And for goodness sake, it's about a concert pianist. And there's no music in the entire film, and it's 1936. And it just really cries out in a number of places for music. For anyone who's really interested in this subject, there's a great book called After the Silence, Silents, by Michael Slowick, who's a fellow professor at Wesleyan. And it's all about what happened to film music between 1926 and 1934. Why it dropped out, why it didn't drop out, the myths that we know, the different ways that people tried to make it work. Did it have to be diegetic sound, if I'm using that word, or non-diegetic sound? And that's the college word for, the thing where you would see somebody in a 1931 film walk over to the radio, turn it on, the underscore would come out of the radio, and then they would play out the scene and then turn off the radio and they were done, to justify where the music was coming from. So it's a great book. It's called After the Silence, and he's really, studied. I think he watched and studied 250 films from that time period, and it lays it all out for you.
Well, it seems like a fertile area for potential programming, and
definitely,
we'll have to put Mad Love on your Halloween list.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I mean, there's a lot of things I did. Many years ago at a show, I did a live piano score for one or two of the educational shorts that Buster Keaton made for educational pictures, where there's just no dialogue. Like One Run Elmer has almost no dialogue. Forget it, and of course there's no music, and it really needs something.
We did want to assure people Buster Keaton did not make movies that were educational.
just for physical comedians, yeah. Oh yeah.
But that was the name of a production company that never bothered to change their name when they changed their product.
Yeah. So there's definitely room for it when it's done carefully and tastefully, and just to enhance. As I said to the audience at the show of Frankenstein at the Library of Congress, I said, from what I understand, Universal was one of the last studios to convert over to sound. They had just spent a lot of money on All Quiet, and they didn't spend a lot of money on these horror pictures. I mean, who knew they were going to be their bread and butter for the next how many decades? And even if James Whale and Todd Browning wanted music, they weren't going to get it. Mm. So I don't know. There are definitely people who believe you shouldn't mess with this and leave it as it is, and that's their original vision. But I also think that because of budgets or just the technical aspects of it, there wasn't going to be a score anyway. And there's plenty of film that deserves. I did it. One of the high school programs I did in Rifle, Colorado, a few weeks ago. One of the teenage students spoke with me afterwards, and as there invariably is, there's one kid who is a Stooges fan. And we were talking about that. He said, "Have you ever played for a Three Stooges short?" And I said, "No." And I thought, that's a really good idea. Mm-hmm. Because those films never had music, and they don't need a lot, but just between the opening and closing titles, you could do something to just add a little bit. So it might be fun to try.
I'd say if there's a theme to your career, more than it being anything about music per se, it's really the concept that performance of a film is different than a film. It's a separate artistic moment.
Oh, it's definitely different, and that's what, among other things, is what makes silent film and the silent film experience unique. Mm-hmm. You don't think as an audience member, I'm at a performance, but you do pay attention in a slightly different way, because there is somebody in the front of the room playing an instrument or an orchestra of human beings creating or performing the music. And because of that performance element, even if it's out of the corner of your mind, it's different. It's not film with no sound. This is something I talk about in the book that I'll publish at some point next year, is that silent film is its own medium in a way.
So here's a reminder to go over to silentfilmmusic.com, sign up for Ben's email, and to check out his schedule of appearances coming up, where he's playing for many films, including Harold Lloyd in The Freshman. So speaking of The Freshman, we've got a piece of your recent performance.
Yes, this is recorded live in performance at the Oscar Larson Performing Arts Center at South Dakota State University in Brookings, South Dakota. This is the second time I've played there, and one of the fun things that I've found out about Oscar Larson is that Oscar and his wife met when they were both in a silent film orchestra in Minneapolis somewhere, or Minnesota. There is a very nice pipe organ in one of the concert halls there in Founders Hall, which I was using to accompany The Freshman with Harold Lloyd. I'll pronounce it wrong. It's Reuter or Reuter, R-E-U-T-E-R, pipe organ. I've heard that organists refer to these as Roto-Rooters, but I don't know why. It's a really nice instrument. And so what we'll hear is a recording from it's the tail end of the party sequence segueing into the moment where the mean guy from school says, you know what, we were just kidding you, and blah, 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 and then Harold breaks down. And so you'll get a real range of the kind of sounds you can get out of this really wonderful pipe organ at Founders Hall at the Oscar Larson Performing Arts Center at South Dakota State University. Here's a few minutes from my score for The Freshman.
Oh, I feel so bad for Harold when I hear that music at the end.
Yeah, and there were things that I noticed, because I did the score twice, and the first time I played for it, it's been a while since I played for it, but I was very much aware of the moments where Lloyd has a natural, honest acting moment when he realizes, oh, it's actually this, or, oh, this isn't going to happen. Also, the moment when he's wiping the mirror and sees Jobina in the background, and those were moments when I would just come way down to help draw the audience up into his. I mean, he's really having an honest, real acting moment there. It's really wonderful. And what I wish I had recorded both performances, because on the first night I forgot my recorder in the car, and that was the night that, at the moment when he breaks down and cries, the audience gave out an audible, absolutely sincere "aww." And I'd never had that happen to me before, and it was just wonderful. They were really into the film, and it was just wonderful.
It's just what he would have wanted. That it's just.
I think so.
Yeah.
Lloyd was following on what Chaplin had figured out as far as balancing moments of seriousness and pathos with all the crazy slapstick.
All right, finally, we've got a batch of questions from our Facebook page, which is called The Silent Film Music Podcast with Ben Modell. So while you're working to try and keep up to date with Ben, join that page. We'll certainly keep you updated on the activities of this podcast and whatever pertains to that. And some of our listeners were kind enough to post some questions. And some of these are issues we've talked about before, but people are always joining us for the first time, so it doesn't hurt to circle back and talk about some of these things again. So we have a listener, and I'm going to mangle your name, sir, and I'm apologizing in advance. Robert Sivchik has a string of questions. I'm going to group his questions together.
Okay.
How important in playing music is it to adapt the music to sudden situations in movies? For example, a pratfall in the case of comedy, plot twist. Is such a procedure necessary, or does it depend on the style of the musician? And he also asks, what work does Mr. Modell prefer, improvisation or playing prepared and developed music in advance?
Well, improvised is always easier, and I've had an opportunity recently when I was in Rifle, Colorado with Symphony in the Valley, where they did 2 of my orchestral scores, but they invited me to sit in with the orchestra, and I forgot how nerve-wracking that is. Last time I did it, it was even more nerve-wracking because it was for City Lights, conducted by Timothy Brock. So, but it's not something I usually do. It's a different mindset, and it's definitely harder because you're reading written music and trying to stay up with the film, whereas if I'm improvising or if I've pre-composed some music and the rest of it I'm drawing from my own musical vocabulary, I can keep my eyes on the screen a good deal of the time, have the images come into my brain, and have music come out of my hands that almost spontaneously is the music I'm hearing in my head to underscore it. It's just easier, and because of the number of shows I do, it's just easier to work that way. Because I don't have time to write out all that music. And if I was just touring with one picture, it would be another story. As far as quick changes, I don't know that it's important. I think it's up to every musician to create their own thing. There are some musicians who, smack their hand on the keys when somebody falls down. That's not my own taste. I have found ways to make a hit or a fall fit musically. In other words, instead of making it like a sound effect, make it line up so it's on a downbeat of something. Because if you watch the performance, you can watch the wind-up or the prepare for the hit, and if you're staying loose enough, you can make things fit. But I've been doing that for a bunch of years, and I'm now thinking, is that too much? Yes, I can do it. I can make it work, but you don't want the audience to be aware of it. And no one has really complained to me about it. I like how you did this thing when Keaton gets hit in the head. But I am always wondering, am I overdoing that? Even though it makes it look like what we're watching is choreographed dance that matches the music.
It's interesting. Some of the best evidence we have of what the practices were are the scores that were issued beginning in around 1927 into the synchronized era, and they finally petered out around 1929, 1930. But we have at least evidence of what audiences expected to hear accompanying a film.
They were used to.
And I find it as a pattern, it's interesting if you're listening to a Vitaphone or a Movietone score, that for a comedy, you're more likely to hear a strophic tune, that it's 16 bars and finishes and resolves. Where a dramatic film will not do that. We usually try not to come to a full cadence and then start something else. It's much more continuous, and it's much more closely following the action, where a lot of comedy accompaniment seems content to just say, hey, it's funny time and I'm giving you a funny atmosphere.
Yeah, and a lot of those late 20s scores are compiled from photoplay music of the time. The difference, I think, is, and this is one of the many things that makes Chaplin's score for City Lights remarkable, is that there is a lot of stopping and starting to go with his action. So one of the things I found fascinating, and I probably already talked about this, but the sequence where Chaplin at the beginning of the film is looking at a shop window and there's two different objects, and he'll step back and the little elevator behind him comes up and he goes back and forth. It's this waltz, and Tim is conducting us, and we stop every 2 or 3 beats. Da 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 dee da 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 da. And so at that point, Chaplin, I guess because he, or Alfred Newman, or the two of them knew that, well, since we can totally control the music, we can do this. And that's something that you hear in Chaplin's score for Modern Times, where there are little things that'll stop and start every bar or two, as opposed to being music beds. It's hard to know what the best way to do is, and I'm still evolving my opinion about it, but the idea is for music to sound like it's coming from inside the film, so that people forget about you.
I love that. And I love that, from inside the film.
It's got to be inside the world of the film and not outside. So if it meets an audience's expectations, then they're not lining anything up with it as part of what their experience. But if it feels like, oh, this is something that fits, then I suppose it's okay, even if the scoring technique isn't what people did in 1925.
I think we've covered the question that Mr. Bill Graff sent: how much is prepared ahead, how much is immediately improvised. I just have a question for him. Are you any relative of Herb Graff, the famous silent film collector?
I never met Herb Graff, but I remember watching his silent comedy film festival on public television when I was, I guess, in the 70s when I was a kid. I think it was a mix of films that came from his and Bill Everson's collection. I think it was him and Bill Everson and Walter Kerr who put those together. Mm-hmm. I met one of his other sons at a show I did a long time ago, but yeah, I don't know.
So if you are, let us know. We'd love to talk.
Yeah.
And our last question from Agnes McFadden: how do you prepare to do a score when it is a film of which you are unfamiliar, haven't seen, and there's no screener offered?
Well, Agnes, as you know from coming to Mostly Lost, that happens sometimes. The analogy I like to use is that it's kind of like driving somewhere at night that you've never been before and you don't have your GPS. You don't just stare at the yellow line and move forward. You're looking all over the road for deer or mailboxes or, there's that Denny's I have to make a right at, and stuff like that. And you're also looking around thinking, okay, what 2 or 3 things could happen through that door, through that window? This woman has just pricked her finger. What's going to happen next? Is she going to do this? Is that going to happen? So you're in multiple realities. You're thinking, well, what's come already? What's happening right now? What several things could happen next? And to stay loose musically, in the sense that playing something that, if you're really not sure where this is going, that will still work because the audience is lining the music up. So you don't have to be super specific. It's again one of these things where how much is on the screen and how much does the audience need help. So it's and sometimes you get surprised by things. I like that story that William Perry told about the sustain pedal stuck, and he bent down to fix it, and he came up, and now there was only one boat instead of two. And the other example I think of is I was playing for a series of Japanese silent films at MoMA, and had not seen any of them before and was unfamiliar with the director's work. And I had played for one or two things that were very serious and heavy and dark and like very sad. And then the next film I was supposed to play for was I Was Born But ... directed by Ozu. And I thought, oh, well, here we go again. And so I start out in this dark, somber, minor thing. And if you've seen Ozu films, you know they're a little bit more like, a little more like Hal Roach comedies.
Yeah, those silent kid comedies that he made around 1930.
They're wonderful.
They are the R gang of Japan.
Right. So as soon as I realized what this was, I went into a major key and took off from there. But sometimes you get it wrong, and you try to make it work musically. Hopefully, you can shift quickly so it's not really obvious, like somebody has the wrong record on for 3 minutes. This is something where my background doing improvisational comedy has really helped me. You know, the old saw of, you know, yes and if somebody tags in and has suddenly changed everything, you have to immediately go with it and justify it, identify yourself, label the other person, and make it work. Well, that's episode 53. I'm so glad you were listening, and thanks, Kerr, for making this happen, scheduling it, keeping me on task, and making sure we get out at least one episode a month. This has been the Silent Film Music Podcast with Ben Modell. It's the podcast that takes you inside the mind of someone as they prepare for, perform, and reflect upon live musical accompaniments to silent films and occasionally an early sound film. I'm your host, Ben Modell. I'm a silent film accompanist, historian, presenter, home video label, educator, etc., etc. Here, as always, with my co-producer and co-host, my friend Kerr Lockhart.
Yes,
thanks for doing this. Yeah, thanks so much, Kerr. Do go to my website, silentfilmmusic.com, get on my email list. Email is really the best way to find out what the heck's going on and stay in touch. And until next time, thanks for listening.
Go see a live silent film and be part of the show.
Yeah, and be part of what's happening. And we'll either see you online somewhere or I'll see you at the Silence. So long.